In the late 1920s, Düsseldorf was a city trying to survive. Germany was still bleeding from the wounds of the First World War. The Weimar Republic was unstable. Unemployment was rampant. The streets of industrial cities like Düsseldorf were crowded with desperate people, workers, drifters, families scraping by in cramped tenement housing. It was a city that had known suffering for years. But in 1929, a new kind of fear arrived. Someone was hunting in the streets of Düsseldorf, attacking women and children, leaving victims in parks, on riverbanks, in alleyways. The city had no name for whoever was doing it. The newspapers gave them one: the Vampire of Düsseldorf. Peter Kürten was born on the 26th of May, 1883, in Mülheim on Rhine, a working-class town on the edge of the Rhine. He was the third of 13 children. His father was a violent alcoholic who subjected the entire family to sustained abuse. Beatings were routine. The home was a place of terror, not shelter. Making things worse, the family lived in a single room. There was no privacy, no escape. At a young age, Kürten was also exposed to a local dog catcher, a man who lived in the same building, who tortured animals and introduced the boy to acts of cruelty that no child should witness. By his own later admission, Kürten was committing acts of cruelty toward animals before he was 10 years old. He drowned 2 young boys in the Rhine when he was approximately 9. At the time, no one connected those deaths to Peter Kürten. Peter Kürten's adult life before the Düsseldorf killings was not quiet. He was in and out of prison repeatedly from his teenage years onwards, convicted of theft, fraud, arson, assault. He spent more years behind bars than outside them between 1894 and 2019. Prison, rather than rehabilitating him, appeared to deepen his rage. He later stated in psychiatric interviews that he would spend time in his cell deliberately cultivating violent fantasies, visualizing attacks in extraordinary detail, using them as a mental escape from incarceration. He was also convicted on multiple occasions of assaulting and attempting to strangle women, crimes that received minimal sentences. The system released him repeatedly. By the time he arrived in Düsseldorf in the late 1920s, he had spent the better part of 3 decades cycling through German prisons and emerging each time with his impulses completely intact. In February 1929, the attacks began. The first known victim was an 8-year-old girl named Rosa Oliger. She was found in a vacant lot, stabbed multiple times. Kürten had also attempted to burn her body using petrol. Days later, a man named Rudolf Scher was found stabbed to death. The city was immediately gripped by fear. Police had no clear suspect. The attacks seemed random. The victims had nothing connecting them: different ages, different areas of the city, different times of day. Over the following months, the attacks continued. Women were attacked in parks. Strangers were stabbed on streets at night. Young girls disappeared. Kürten used multiple methods: a knife, his hands, a hammer. The variety made profiling him almost impossible for the investigators of the era. The city began to lock its doors before dark. By the summer of 1929, Düsseldorf was paralyzed. Newspapers across Germany were covering the case. The attacks had now claimed multiple lives and left many more survivors traumatized. Police mounted one of the largest manhunts in Weimar-era Germany. Thousands of individuals were questioned. Hundreds of leads were followed. Suspects were detained and released. Nothing led to Peter Kürten, because Peter Kürten looked like nobody's idea of a monster. He was neatly dressed, polite, he held a steady job, he was married. Neighbors described him as quiet, unremarkable.
a normal man. He attended crime scenes after his own attacks, observing police activity. In at least one case, he spoke to investigators as a concerned citizen. Kürten's methods were varied, which was precisely what made him so difficult to identify and catch. He used knives, he used his hands to strangle, he used a carpenter's hammer. He selected victims opportunistically, women walking alone, children playing near parks, strangers encountered at night. His attacks were frenzied in their violence, but calculated in their execution. He chose locations carefully, areas he knew, places where the likelihood of interruption was low. He later confessed to experiencing an almost trance-like state during attacks, completely detached from consequence or risk. In psychiatric interviews conducted after his arrest, Kürten described his crimes with unsettling clarity and without apparent guilt, providing details that confirmed attacks investigators had not yet even attributed to him. He described the city of Düsseldorf as his hunting ground. It was not a detective that caught Peter Kürten. It was a young woman named Maria Budlik. On the 14th of May, 1930, Maria had arrived in Düsseldorf from Cologne looking for work. She was approached at the train station by a man who offered to help her find lodgings. She became suspicious, and the encounter ended. Minutes later, she encountered another man, Peter Kürten, who also offered to help. He took her to his apartment on Mettmannerstrasse. She later told police that she had feared the worst, but Kürten walked her safely to a tram stop afterwards. Before they parted, he told her the street where he lived. Maria wrote it down. Then she wrote a letter to a friend describing the encounter. The letter was delivered to the wrong address, and the woman who received it read it, recognized the significance, and went to the police. A wrong address. That was what ended Peter Kürten. Police interviewed Maria Budlik. She led them to Mettmannerstrasse. On the 24th of May, 1930, Peter Kürten was confronted by his wife, who had by now been told by police that her husband was the Düsseldorf killer. Kürten met her near his home. He confessed to her directly. He told her everything. And then he made her an offer. He told her to turn him in to police and collect the reward money that had been posted for information leading to the killer's arrest. She did. Kürten was arrested the same day without resistance. At the police station, he began talking almost immediately, providing a full and detailed confession that stretched across multiple sessions. He confessed to 68 crimes, including murders that police had not yet attributed to him. He described each one in precise and clinical detail. The trial of Peter Kürten opened on April 13, 1931 in Düsseldorf. He was charged with 9 counts of murder and 7 counts of attempted murder. The courtroom was packed. Journalists from across Europe attended. Kürten became one of the most discussed criminal cases on the continent. He sat composed throughout, calm, occasionally almost theatrical in the way he engaged with proceedings. Psychiatric experts testified at length. The question of his sanity was debated intensely. Ultimately, the court found him legally sane and fully responsible. On April 22, 1931, Peter Kürten was found guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to death 9 times, once for each murder. On July 2, 1931, Peter Kürten was executed by guillotine at Klingelputz prison in Cologne. His last reported words asked whether he would be able to hear the sound of his own blood as the blade fell. Some questions are better left unanswered. Peter Kürten was convicted of 9 murders, but investigators and historians believe the true number was significantly higher, possibly over 30 victims across his lifetime, including the 2 boys he drowned in the Rhine as a child. His case became foundational in the early development of criminal psychology and forensic psychiatry in Europe. The psychiatric testimony at his trial was among the first serious attempts in a European court to grapple with the question of whether extreme violence could constitute mental illness and what that meant legally. It influenced how German courts approached questions of criminal responsibility for crimes for decades afterwards. Fritz Lang's 1931 film, M, one of the most celebrated films in cinema history, was directly inspired by the Kürten case.